Trump is not very popular in the United States. His approval rating is falling. His policies don't make sense. Everything is so noisy in my country right now. But the fact of the matter is Americans don't want a dictator. Trump is surrounded by yes people. They did what the boss said. Donald Trump does not have strategy. The United States is an irresponsible actor in the world scene and has been for a number of years. And when Indian friends said, no, we have great relations, I said, don't be so sure. From my point of view, India is a great power. It is the most populous country in the world. It is a fast-growing nation, incredibly skilled. It doesn't need the United States as its overlord or as its strategic ally.
Hello and welcome to Tracking Trump on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. So today is the big day. Trump's punitive tariffs against India for buying Russian oil, ostensibly, have kicked in, taking the total tariffs against India to a whopping 50%. It's amongst the highest in the world. Now, many had hoped that this would have been averted by some kind of a ramp-off since Trump announced it. But it has happened and it is in place. In fact, the rhetoric has only got worse. Trump's key trade advisor, Peter Navarro, upped the ante this week by accusing India of being a laundromat for the Kremlin and fueling the war in Ukraine through its purchase of Russian oil. India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar has said the tariffs are unjustified and unreasonable and that they are being presented as an oil issue. That's because the United States is not going after China, which is the biggest buyer of Russian oil, or the European Union, which is the largest importer of Russian LNG. As the tariffs described by sanctions by the White House kick in, what should India's economy be ready for? How can India navigate this tough moment in its foreign policy? Well, joining us on DeKoder today is renowned economist and Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs, who has been more than blunt in his criticism of Trump and his tariffs. Professor Sachs is a champion of sustainable development known globally for his work. He has advised governments and the United Nations, serving as a special advisor to the UN Secretary General for years. He's worked tirelessly to reduce extreme poverty and hunger, and we're very honored to have him on the program today. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much for being with us.
It's my great pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Well, Professor Sachs, I wanted to begin by quoting an interview that you recently gave where you said that these tariffs on India are not a strategy, they are sabotage. It is the stupidest tactical move in US foreign policy. Now, I wanted to ask you, surely there are people in the Trump administration, especially in the State Department, who would see that this is, as you put it, a stupid tactical move, and yet he's still gone ahead and done it. Why is that?
Because Trump is surrounded by yes people, and they did what the boss said. What the boss did makes absolutely no sense. It's illogical, as Foreign Minister Jaishankar noted. It is completely unjustified. Given the realities of Russia's trade with Europe and with China as well. It undermines years of building a relationship between the United States and India. But all of this, I also have to add, doesn't shock me. Partly it doesn't shock me because Donald Trump does not have strategy, but also because I told friends in India for many years, don't trust the United States, period. The idea that India was going to slide in to fill the role that China had filled now that the US is in a trade war with China was not a realistic approach of India, because the United States is protectionist, whether it's against China or against India. And so India was not going to have a burgeoning export growth to the US market. I said that would be stopped. Now, Trump has done it in a cruder, more unjustified, illogical way than I would have guessed. But the basic point that I was making, which is that India will find closer partners in the BRICS, in ASEAN, in West Asia, in Africa, in Latin America than it will in the United States remains, for me, the main strategic point. India needs a diversified base. The United States, sad to say, is not a responsible country or a responsible partner.
There are so many follow-up questions I have to what you've just said. Let me begin with the last point that you made, that India may find more common ground with, let's say BRICS, which is, of course, has Russia and China and South Africa and other countries now as part of that grouping. And you have also suggested that India would do well to increase its own trade relationship with China. You would also be aware, of course, that India has a very complicated relationship with China. We've just sort of re-established a full diplomatic relationship and people-to-people contact after years after a very bloody border clash in Ladakh. So would you also advise India to be cautious? We can't just sort of go and embrace China today because we might have a common adversary, for want of a better word, with the US.
I believe that India-China relations are very important for both countries. There are real issues. I don't want to minimize them. The two countries have been at war. They've had border clashes. The border dispute goes back, as so many other disputes, goes back to the British, goes back to the Radcliffe Line and the McMahon Line, which were lines drawn on maps by British military mid-level officials that knew nothing about what they were doing. So these do need to be resolved. But the common interests of India and China in a multipolar world in which neither country is bossed around by the United States is a very important common need. The mutual benefit of trade between the two would be enormous. I say to the Chinese all the time, goodwill from China is to support India as the sixth permanent member of the UN Security Council. I really want to see India in the UN Security Council as permanent member. It's the only country in the world that has this unequivocal claim to being a great power that's not in the Security Council right now. And I want China to support India for that. So that's another way to improve the relations of the two. But the truth is, the BRICS really make sense. The BRICS is the grouping that says we are half the world economy, half the world population, and we don't want to be bossed around by the old imperial powers, whether it's Europe or the United States. We want a true multipolarity and a true multilateral world. And then along comes Donald Trump with his demands, his completely unjustified unilateral actions, his sanctions. He proves me right, I'm sad to say. I am sorry to say it, but it doesn't shock me. The United States is an irresponsible actor in the world scene and has been for a number of years. And when Indian friends said, no, we have great relations, I said, don't be so sure. I know the United States. It is not a stable political situation right now, and it is not a friend of any country, allied or other, right now. It is simply
Absolutely.
lashing out unilaterally.
You know, you mentioned that India should also look at, trade with other countries apart from BRICS. Now that the 50% tariffs have kicked in, India just signed a free trade agreement with the UK, which was, a very big milestone. And do you think that by looking at similar agreements with other key players in the world, we could somehow offset these punitive tariffs, or does this have the potential to really hurt our export market, particularly garments, footwear? There are some industries where it's disproportionately highly exposed to the American market.
I think in general, it is important not to exaggerate the U.S. market. The U.S. is now about 14% of world output by purchasing power measures. That's a lot, but it's not dominant in any way. Similarly, in international trade, roughly the same, 13 or 14% of the global imports that are taken in. But the U.S. is also a slow-growing region. The US underlying economic growth is 1 or 2% right now. Europe, 1 or 2%. So the old Western world is not the dynamic part of the world. India grows at 6 to 7% per year. Next door to you in ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, growth is going to be reliably 5 to 7% per year. Africa is going to be growing rapidly in the next 30 years, albeit from a lower income level. So to my mind, the real dynamism in the world today is the 85% of the world population living in Russia, Central Asia, West Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Africa, and Latin America, not in the older powers, the United States and Europe. So diversification makes sense. One thing I would say is that India had the choice, it turned it down in the past, to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is China, Japan, Korea, the ASEAN 10, Australia, and New Zealand. I believe that India should be the 16th member of RCEP because I think RCEP, this Regional Comprehensive Partnership, is a large, important, dynamic region. And if India joined it, wow, that would be the main growth pole for the whole world economy. So I would like India to join RCEP as a part of mutual benefit. I'm working a lot in ASEAN countries. I see so many links between India and ASEAN that should be made in economic terms. So I think the opportunities are really very, very strong.
All of this actually blew up in the midst of India and the United States holding trade deal negotiations. And now the US team that was supposed to be in India actually this week, their visit has been put off. We don't know when they'll come, if they will. Do you think India should still pursue this trade deal with the United States?
Yes, because there's no harm in talking. It should just not accept a bad deal. The one thing that India should do immediately is to say that penalty tariff, so-called, has to be eliminated, full stop, unilaterally, so we can get back to actual negotiations. This is true not only because it's completely illogical, it completely hurts the U.S. interest, but also it comes after the Alaska summit where Trump himself said that he's not going to impose sanctions on Russia even, much less secondary sanctions. So the only one that is paying the cost of that turns out to be India. That's absurd. Everything got completely messed up in this. So the Indian side should say to the United States, look, not only did it not make sense, not only is it punitive, is it unfair, is it illogical, but after the Alaska summit, stop, take it off the table. It's not even on your agenda, United States, because you and Russia are actually working towards a solution to Ukraine, not based on threats. So why are you threatening us or hurting us?
But
this is, I think, what the Indian side should say very clearly.
But that then proves the point that all of this isn't really about Russian oil, is it? Is it, as you have suggested, more to do with preventing India's growth economically?
I think that at the core of it is illogic and ignorance, frankly. I do not believe they know what they're doing in Washington. They're overwhelmed. It's improvisation day by day. This 25% penalty tariff was announced as part of a demand by Trump that Russia should enter into an unconditional ceasefire by August 8th. And if not, the secondary penalties would go on. And then Trump himself dropped that threat. Then came the Alaska summit. So I regard this as mostly incompetence and confusion rather than a direct design against India. But I do say that it's consistent with my view that the U.S. is not trustworthy in these kinds of relations, much less in strategic relations. let me add another point, which is maybe even a little more sensitive. The whole Quad idea that the United States and India and Australia and Japan are getting together informally to be a security zone against China, India should not play in this kind of game of the United States. This is another case where India's interests are not served at all. India is a great nation, a great power. It doesn't need an alliance with the United States, which is not even feasible. And playing that game only worsens India's own flexibility and its own relations with China.
That's a very important point that you make. You're saying that India should walk away from the Quad, which anyway is kind of shaky at the moment given the India-US relationship. And the fact that India and China are sort of, yeah.
I would never have entered the Quad. I regard the Quad as typical US meddling, creating problems where there don't need to be problems. And from my point of view, India is a great power. It is the most populous country in the world. It is a fast-growing nation, incredibly skilled. It doesn't need the United States as its overlord or as its strategic ally. No. India has its own interests, and it doesn't need to be strategically aligned with the United States. It has close relations with Russia, which are good that it has that. I think it should have it with China. I think the BRICS is very important. In other words, India is so big, so important, so powerful, it should stand on its own and say to the United States, fine, don't meddle. We're not against you, but we're also not an ally of the United States.
Right. Professor Sachs, just the last couple of questions. One is on the impact these tariffs are having on American consumers. And I'm very interested to know when and if they are going to feel the impact of these tariffs, not just from India, but from other countries. The Swiss also have a huge tariff slapped on their goods, for example. But when are the American people going to realize that this is hurting them and they're paying more for goods?
Yes, it hurts. It's not crippling yet, and it won't be crippling. So it's not going to be some day of revolt. What it's doing actually is making the U.S. less competitive. This is the basic point. You import at higher cost, not only final goods, but also intermediate goods you can't export. The U.S. cannot compete with China especially, but it'll be true of India also. It will not be able to compete with India and China in RCEP, in Africa, in third markets. The U.S. is protecting its own market at the cost of the U.S. competitiveness in the rest of the world. It's also, yes, it is making it harder to do short-run macroeconomic management. That's why Trump is on a tirade against our central bank, and he's trying to fire illegally one of the members of that bank because Trump, in his obstreperous way, is trying to take control. He doesn't obey the law. He doesn't respect institutions. He doesn't respect India, but he also doesn't respect the Federal Reserve Board. So in this sense, yes, it is making everything more complicated. Trump is not very popular in the United States. His approval rating is falling. His policies don't make sense. And so this is a problem that the United States is not a strong actor in the world. It is protectionist and unstable, I'm afraid to say. Which
is actually a great sort of way to conclude with my last question, because Trump casually threw the word dictator into the mix this week. And seemed to, suggest that he was one because that's what people want. And I'm sure that at some level that's ringing alarm bells even within his MAGA universe, or they kind of look at him as a benevolent dictator of some sort.
I admit I missed that little juicy tidbit somewhere along the way because everything is so noisy in my country right now. But the fact of the matter is Americans don't want a dictator. We don't want to be ruled by decrees coming from on high, thunderbolts sent from Mount Olympus. Every day we get executive decrees that say, I declare an emergency. I mean, where does Trump have the authority to put on a 25% tariff on India anyway, a penalty tariff? He does
I'll tell you
have
what
that.
I'll tell you what he said exactly. Sorry to interrupt. He said a lot of people are saying maybe we'd like a dictator. You know, that's what he says. And I mean, you know, when you see what he's doing, whether it is, as you pointed out, with the Federal Reserve and other American institutions, it seems that maybe that's what he believes.
I can assure you, no Americans want a dictator, period. This is so completely antithetical to our real needs and to our political culture. This is a Trump reverie that has nothing to do with reality.
As is much else in the Trump world. But Professor Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much for joining us on DeKoder today and giving us a lot of clarity and an idea of what the road ahead could be for India as it navigates this difficult time, both economically and politically. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And that's it on the show this week. We'll be back again next week doing what else but cracking Trump. Goodbye.